And a lot of people want to have information about their marital problems, family problems. They come for all kinds of reasons. So we work with everything, and that's my therapy part. And the subconscious, I always ask them to take it back to the most appropriate past life to explain what's happening now. Because you've all had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of lifetimes. Everybody has. You're going to get something. You can go to a hypnotist and have a past life. It's not hard to do if they know how to do it. But then what are they going to do with it? They don't follow through. It's just an interesting thing. I want to take you to the one that's going to explain what's happening now and then fix things. I like to fix the person. I don't want them to leave if they're not fixed. Now, this doesn't sound strange, but I'm teaching it now, and my students are emailing me saying, it works, we're able to do it. And in the beginning, I didn't know, could I teach it to anybody? When you develop something, can you show somebody else how to do it? So I thought I'm going to try, but they are telling me now they are beginning to understand it. The doctors in Russia want me to come back and make sure they're doing it right. But there's no guarantee everyone's going to be able to do it. I think it takes a certain, I don't know. What I think it is, they are not going to work with you if you don't come at it for the right angle, the right reason. Because I kept saying, what if I teach this to someone and they use it in the wrong way? I don't think they're going to work with people if they're not using it for the right reasons. But this is what I'm going to get to next, is where my information comes from that I write about. Now, I've also had 20 years working with the UFOs and ET cases. So I wrote 4 books about that, and I've got theories that nobody else in the field has come up with, because we go to what's really going on. But anyway, I'm doing the session, and during the session, when we get to the subconscious part, and they start explaining, I have the person bring a list of questions. We go over the list of questions, and they're answering everything that is appropriate that they can. Sometimes it has a time factor, and they can't tell the person everything. But it is always the same voice through everybody I work with. Same phraseology, same terminology, same words. Now, how are you going to explain that? It's different if someone is channeling one entity or something. This comes through everybody, thousands of people, everybody I'm working with. It's the same, whatever you want to call it. It's too big to call a being. It's the same intelligence or whatever you want to say. And it knows me. To me now, it's like having a conversation with an old friend. It's just like, hello, okay, now we'll get to work. But everybody I'd work with, it comes through. Now, the strangest thing that began to happen was toward the end of the session, they never interrupt the therapy. But toward the end of the session, they'll say, Dolores, this is the next piece of information you need for your next book. And they'll give me a theory that I've never heard of before. Sometimes it's interwoven into the whole session. Well, then that may be in England. I'll get home. A week later in the U.S., I do another person. They come through again and continue what they started in England to give me the rest of the theory. And this comes through person after person until I finally got what they want me to write about and want me to lecture on. And how are you going to explain that? That's what people don't understand. What I'm dealing with here is highly unusual, but it speaks the truth, and it's always the same information through everybody. Now, how can you explain it? Some people have said I must be lying, I have to be a fraud, has to be a hoax. I don't know how anybody can say that. Even in my classes, I played different tapes from different people to show it sounds alike. And I have some people in the audience here I know have taken my class. And don't you agree, the ones who have taken the class, that there is something bigger than all of us that we're communicating with? So why not pass that on? They said this is the therapy of the future, that we're not going to need doctors, surgery, or anything. We're going to be able to help ourselves with our own mind. Anyway, they began giving me all of this information. And what I'm getting now, if I'd got it 20 years ago, I would never have understood it. They're very wise that way. They started me out 30 years ago. I've been more intense in the last 20 years ago. But 30 years ago, it was simple stuff. And it was like spoon feeding you. Give you a little piece of information and see if you can digest it. Then give you a little more and see how you handle that, and a little more. I had everybody that comes to see me wants to know one question. What's my purpose? Why am I here? What am I supposed to be doing? It's a universal question. Everybody wants to know it. We can find out if it's appropriate. Because the subconscious says, suppose we told you too soon. Maybe what you're supposed to be doing is so radically different than what you're doing now. If you found out too soon, you'd say, oh, I don't want to do that. I'd never be able to do that. And you'd block yourself and sabotage yourself. So if you're not supposed to know, they will come through and I ask that question and they'll say it's not time. We can't tell them. If it is time, they'll tell you everything you need to know. But if it's not, they'll say it's not time. I had one man, they said that, and they said it's not time, but we can't tell him. But they said, oh, we wish we could. You don't know what we see. But they said, consider he is where you were 20 years ago. He said, you don't give a baby a 3-course meal. You start a baby out with milk, with cereal, crushed vegetables. You don't give a baby a steak. You have to spoon feed it little by little. And he said, he is where you were at that time. If I had got the information I was getting now, I probably would have stopped my whole practice and said, no, I don't understand this. It's too complicated. And I wouldn't have done any more. But I was led into it gradually to where I'm getting now the information for the Convoluted Universe series. That was a total surprise. I wish I could go back sometimes to the easier days when it was just history, but they won't let me do it. It's just getting more and more complicated because I was doing the UFO material. This is in the book, The Custodians, and they were giving me all these theories about what was happening. And toward the end, suddenly they began getting into different metaphysical concepts. That's when I knew I was going to have to write another book, leading away from UFOs. And I started writing Convoluted Universe Book 1. And they kept giving me a little more and a little more. Like, okay, if you understand this, digest this, we'll give you a little more. I still don't understand a lot of it. I tell them you're going to have to give me analogies, examples, so that I can be able to talk to people. I can't do it if it's so abstract that I don't understand what I'm talking about. So they do that. They will give me examples, but they said sometimes these are very poor examples because there's no words in our language for what they are actually trying to get across. They said, all of your questions will never be answered, because some information is as poison rather than medicine. The human mind cannot handle it. They said it's not the brain, it's the mind. The human mind has no concepts in it that can understand the totality of what it's really all about. And I know I'm getting more and more and more. I got one just a month ago in Montreal, and I said, for Pete's sakes, guys, what are you trying to do? I keep thinking there's nothing else left to find. They've told it all to me. Then they throw another one at me. And so I know I'm not finished, but it's like, I have to understand this to explain it to people. That's the hard part. But that's when they began giving me the concepts as we went along. And a lot of it has to do with simultaneous time. Now, in order for me to understand these things, I have to still think linearly. And I think that's what most of us do because that's the way our minds are set up. We have to think day follows day, week, months, because we're in that concept. We can't think of everything happening at the same time. And I discovered that the first time when I did the Nostradamus material and found out that I was actually time traveling because they said he was living in his time period when I was communicating with him. I was not communicating with the dead. And they said, you must understand that. He is living while you were living. And you have to be careful because you're interfering in his life. You're being allowed to do it, but don't overstep the boundaries. And that was really hard for me to understand because he was so emphatic about it that Nostradamus didn't want to know how he was going to die. He didn't want to know his own future. And so I couldn't tell him things like that. So he was actually living in his life when we were doing the communication. But I didn't know anything about simultaneous time at that time. And people kept saying, explain it. I still don't really know a lot about it, but all I can say is what they tell me, what I report in the books. But a simultaneous time means everything is occurring at the same time. Past, present, future, and all of the probabilities and possibilities, which are enormous, are all supposed to be happening at the same time. And I said, how can that be? We know we grow from a baby to a child to an adult. How can all these things be happening at the same time? They said that's because they're not happening at the same time. Happening, that denotes a beginning and an end. He said everything is existing at the same time. There's a difference. Whether that makes it any clearer or not, they said it's all existing at the same time. Now, it can get very complicated, and sometimes when I'm doing lectures, I try to judge the audience. I don't want to get over their heads. But now it's getting hard to do that because my information is getting more and more complicated. I used to try to keep it simple. I didn't want to blow their minds. That's why I say the Convoluted Universe series are for those people who want their minds bent like pretzels. And people, when I first came out, I thought, oh, they're not going to be ready for this. They ought to read the other ones first and lead up to it. But people jumped right in, and they said, maybe we don't understand it, but it makes us think. So I always tell them in the book, hey, I don't understand this, but I'm putting it out there. See if you can get anything out of it. But each book gets more and more complicated. But let me give you an example, because one thing I'm going to focus on tonight is the new earth we're moving into, but I want to get you some of these background first. Let me give you an example of one of the first things they told me that I was really, just when I think I have everything all figured out, is when they throw another curve at me. Even in the early days, I had reincarnation all figured out. I understood how it worked, and no problem. Then they threw in a concept I'd never heard of before. And it was like, wait a minute now, I've got it all figured out. You're throwing something in here, you're messing with my mind, I don't understand this because it was totally opposite of what I believed. And then I got to thinking, if I didn't at least examine it, I wasn't any better than the church that says, this is what you believe, don't ask any questions, don't look any further. So I began looking at these new concepts, and as hard as they were to digest, they began to make some sense. Then I get another one and another one. And that's what I mean by spoon feeding me. A lot of people say they want to read my books in the order I wrote them, and they can see my evolution that I went through. But one of the things that they told me that was really hard to understand had to do with parallel universes and parallel lives. But I'll start out simple. Okay, they said, when all of us come to crossroads in our lives, We all do. A time in your life when you have to make a decision. You can go one way or the other. You can either have, maybe you want to get married, maybe you want to get divorced, maybe you want to get a different job, maybe you want to move. We all come to those points in our lives as part of living. We have to make a decision. Do I go this way or do I go that way? And you all know if you would have gone the other way, your life would be totally different, wouldn't it? When you look back on it and said, well, if I would have made that other decision, I'd be doing this and this now. And sometimes it's better and sometimes it's not. But we all know that. Okay, we decide we're going to go this way. What happens to the energy we put into the other decision? Energy is alive. Energy creates. Everything is energy. Everything.